BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Tuesday. It is time for True Crime Talk Radio. But first, I would like to remind you guys that I am also the host of the program Astro Psych 400 here on YouTube. It is a different channel, and some people were saying that they use this program, Black Box Online Radio, as a way to fall asleep at night. So I thought, why not create a podcast purely designed to help people fall asleep? And you can hear that on the channel Astro Psych 400. And please like and subscribe to both of these, Black Box Online Radio as well. And a great way to help the shows is to go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse by me, Ned DEHAN. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the Teespring page. Feel free to have a look at some of the merchandise, and remember, being weird is not a crime. Somebody was recently talking to me about the book The Catcher in the Rye, the story of Holden Caulfield, perhaps one of the more famous books among teenagers and people in their early 20s. And I was also having this conversation with them, and I brought up some points about how John Hinckley Jr., the man who shot Ronald Reagan, made a famous statement that if you want to understand anything, just read The Catcher in the Rye. But of course, John Hinckley Jr. was also very much obsessed with the actress Jodie Foster, and he wanted to use the criminal operation that he had concocted in his own mind to draw attention to her. But then I started talking to somebody else about the conversation that I had had, and they said, "Oh, The Catcher in the Rye? What you really need to know is the message of the book Frindle." And I was like, "Frindle? What are you talking about?" They said, "If you want to understand anything about how our society works, read the book Frindle." And that person eventually provided me a copy of it. It is a short novel written for kids, but it's the story of how this boy changes the word pen to frindle, like his fountain pen or ballpoint pen. Instead of calling them pens, he calls them frindles, and about the chain reaction and the cause and effect, and how it makes certain people angry and how people respond to just something so simple, changing the word pen to the word frindle. And it even gets picked up by a newspaper, like a newspaper wants to do a story about all of these chain reaction events that are happening at his school. I believe he's in the 5th grade when the story starts. So there was one sentence in that book, though, that truly stood out to me above all others, and I promise you this is connected to the true crime world. And there's this fictional journalist writes a story, and the boy's reading about it, and he said, "She told the truth. Everything she said was completely true, but it was the way in which she told the truth that fooled people." And I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I think you can get the major idea there, because that's how I think a lot of true crime writers operate. Recently on the channel, I did 2 episodes on the writings of Michael Sudduth. He wrote a very detailed response, actually, to the book Soul Survivor, which tells the story of James Leininger, who was a boy, and his parents says that he was reincarnated, like he is the reincarnation of a World War II fighter pilot named James Houston. And Michael Sudduth wrote a response to that. He has also written a book about post-mortem survival, talking about this concept of reincarnation. And I interviewed Michael, and I shared our interview here on this channel, Black Box Online Radio, for last week's Anything Goes segment. And when we finished the interview, we were talking about true crime writers and such, and he even connected it to the Zodiac world, especially because so many people, whether true crime writers or specifically writing about the Zodiac Killer, they will put out concepts that are not necessarily proven, that are not necessarily factual, but a lot of them are inferences or implications or even just flat out possibilities. This is what may have happened. And Tom Voigt released a video on his YouTube channel talking about the writer Ann Penn, who is the author of Serial Slaughter as well as What If, Golden State Killer, Zodiac Solved. I've also interviewed Ann Penn for the Zodiac Killer channel's Interviews with the Experts series, and he pointed out how instead of providing analysis, she is asking questions to the reader in place of the analysis. Well, where's the missing evidence? Well, where is the murder weapon? How could this be connected? And it's quite similar, though, to that concept that is mentioned in the book Frindle. Just substituting something in place of something else. But I think the quotation of, she told the truth, everything she said was completely true, it was the way in which she told the truth, I think that more relates to how playing to people's emotions, making a mountain out of a molehill, or also what some people like to do, if it's done in the opposite way, they start nitpicking at someone else's theory because they want to try and show that oh yeah, this person's wrong because well they were supposed to put a comma in this sentence but they didn't, and therefore their whole theory is incorrect. But then there are larger accusations. Back in the 1980s, Gareth Penn and Robert Graysmith both wrote books about the Zodiac Killer, and Robert Graysmith has been under a lot of scrutiny, especially within the last 10 years, about how the claims that he made in his Zodiac Killer books are not always 100% accurate, but in all seriousness, Graysmith gets accused of this every time he does everything because he wasn't someone who started out in the world of true crime research. He says very clearly by his own admission he was a cartoonist for the San Francisco Chronicle. Perhaps he was also a production assistant there, but it turned into writing sentences that were half true and half false. And I was discussing this with Mark Hewitt, who also appeared on the Zodiac Killer channel's Interview with the Experts series, and he said that Graysmith is the grandfather of Zodiac research. We have to accept that. But also, he did make numerous errors and state falsehoods in his book, and this could relate to, firstly, not having the use of an electronic database, so he's just sifting through papers, and he made genuine errors in his research, and he also could have been under pressure from the publisher to do such. But well, Gareth Penn, who wrote the book Time 17 in 1987, talking about the Zodiac Killer, he openly apologized for many inaccuracies in his first edition of Time 17, which he said in a different book called The Second Power. I have a response to that one here on this channel. As always, you can like and subscribe. But what Gareth Penn was talking about in The Second Power was he was apologizing for making numerous mistakes that, and by his own admission, it was just he misunderstood certain aspects of the case. And you might be thinking that Gareth Penn is the guy who thought that everything was about radians, Morse code, and binary, and there are all these mathematical signatures in the Zodiac Killer mystery. But that's not so much what he was apologizing for. He particularly said his biggest error was saying that Cecilia Ann Shepard, who was attacked by the Zodiac Killer on September 27th of 1969, was sexually assaulted with the knife. And he was like, I just got it wrong. That's what he said. And you will encounter things like that, but that's more about just somebody making a mistake and owning up to it, whereas other people are more or less just stating possibilities that they have no proof of. Some people are saying things that they cannot support with factual evidence. Instead, they throw in a lot of guesswork, a lot of insinuation, and that really crosses a line into inappropriate territory. But on the notion of inappropriate writing in the true crime world, I started following David Gold's YouTube channel a little bit more closely, watching some more of his videos. He uploads very frequently, even more frequently than I do here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio. And I have to introduce his theory in somewhat of a twisted roundabout way. I mean, he says it's not a theory, but he is the guy who said that there was this group of people, Frank Morse as well as John and Clarence Anglin, and they escaped from Alcatraz in 1962, and then they went on to become the Zodiac Killer. The three of them worked on it together, as well as Frank Morse went on to be D.B. Cooper, and he was also the Phantom Killer in 1946, as well as doing other things like every crime under the sun, more or less. And he not only says that it is well, again, he doesn't say that it's a theory. He says that these are stories that he heard because he knew Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers directly, and they shared this information with him, and they walked him through, okay, this is the artwork on the Halloween card, and this is how he wants to convey the message to David Gold, and his book is called My Dance with the Zodiac Killer. And I was reminded of a conversation that I had about 15 years ago with someone when we were talking about like dark comedy, or how some comedy writers make fun of subjects that are very serious, and they make fun of things that you wouldn't typically find funny, whether it's morbid humor or just very tragic situations in American culture, but some people are still finding humor in that. And I have no problem with dark comedy, but that's what we were talking about. And my friend said, I should say former friend actually, and some window into my world. This former friend said that, okay, that stuff is not inappropriate, but maybe dark comedy has its big toe in the door of inappropriate behavior. Just a little bit, right? Well, I think David Gold's material is perhaps a little bit more than just having its big toe in the door of inappropriate behavior. It's almost halfway in, because you have some guy who's just saying that he actually experienced all of these things, where the guys who escaped from Alcatraz confessed to being all of these criminals, or they confess to all these types of criminal behavior in a completely unsupported, uncorroborated, and unsubstantiated way, because it's not just who can tell the best story. And I think that's how a lot of people get caught up in the true crime world, whether it's not even only the Zodiac Killer case, but John Benet Ramsey, for example, or last week I was talking a lot about the Darlie Routier case. I think all of those true crime cases can fall subject to this, where people simply think it is who can tell the best story. And if I ever do a future episode on Gary Francis Post again, I would really want to zone in on some of that, because the group called the Case Breakers claims that they have identified the Zodiac Killer, and that his name was Gary Francis Post, and that he was a house painter from California. But they took such bare bones pieces of evidence. So here's a blurry photograph of this, and this is him wearing a shirt, and really, really basic stuff. And then they're now revealing a little bit more of their info, and they're trying to stitch it together in a storytelling way. But that's just taking a bunch of ordinary facts and creating fictitious connections. The conspiracy theorists get accused of this all the time, but the thing that we have to remember with conspiracy theorists is they are using real facts. And even in other stories, like James Leinecker, for example, the parents of the boy who claim that their son is the reincarnation of the World War II fighter pilot James Houston, they're also doing a lot of that. They are taking real facts that their son is having nightmares where he is in a plane, and that the plane is crashing into the water, and then they're projecting a story onto it. Because I was interviewing Michael Sudduth about that very concept. I was asking him during that interview, like, are these people frauds? The people who are saying that their son is the reincarnation of the World War II fighter pilot James Houston, and they have a book out called Soul Survivor. And he said, no, I don't think they are. And there could be a combination of other motives for that. That, number one, somebody would simply just be caught up in the storytelling mess, or that they believed something for so long that they don't want to give it up even when they're faced with contradictory evidence. But it also, my personal take on the subject was, no matter what the origin of their claim is, that they're definitely trying to work the kinks out of their story. And Michael Sudduth provided a very strong example of that, when they always would tell the story of how their son, James Leinecker, would say that, hey, this is where my plane crashed, pointing to a photo of Iwo Jima, but James Houston, the World War II fighter pilot, didn't die at Iwo Jima. He died about 200 miles away, or his plane went down 200 miles away. So then they say that, oh, no, he never said that's where my plane crashed. He said that's when my plane crashed. As I said, working the kinks out of their story to make it a little bit more acceptable to the general public, or that they've been faced with contradictory evidence, so instead they reshaped it and reworked it into their own storytelling. mechanism. But because I was talking about the Zodiac Killer for a little bit, and I was also talking about James Leininger, I really do need to reiterate a particular point that I said during the interview with um, Michael Sudduth, and that was that even if someone is hearing their son saying that he's having these nightmares of being a, a pilot and that his plane has crashed, and the parents then go on to say, okay, he is the reincarnation of the World War II fighter pilot James Houston. Even if those things happened in that order, I would still say that that is definitely pushing toward fraudulent territory, because the example that I used was if someone says that they had a dream that they were wearing a black mask and they stabbed two people, and then I start telling everybody, oh, this person had a dream that they were the Zodiac Killer. Well, did they say that they were the Zodiac Killer? No. Did they say that they were Lake Berryessa were the Zodiac Killer committed that crime? No. Did they say anything about the way the victims looked, or that there's a very tall man and a blonde-haired woman, and that they were wearing these types of clothes, and that there's this lake nearby? No, they said they were wearing a black mask, and they stabbed two people. If that's the only info that I have, and then I start running around telling the world that so-and-so said that they're having this dream that he's the Zodiac Killer, he must be the reincarnation of the Zodiac Killer, I would put that in fraudulent territory, because it's adding an additional uncertain layer to the situation, saying things that are not completely true, substituting storytelling for hard facts. But it's not even the fact that it's storytelling, it's that they're trying to pass off the storytelling as analysis, and it's not. So I think that that is just something that we're going to encounter all the time. And you really will experience this more when you get into the things like the Soul Survivor book, because that is not only about true crime. It's only true crime if you can expose somebody as a fraud. But that's pushing into the paranormal territory, and people are going to be making stuff up all the time. But since I did the 2 episodes on Soul Survivor, I just found countless sources on Amazon.com. There are so many books that have been written about that concept, about reincarnation, and not the traditional kind, like Hindu spirituality and such, but that children are having very vivid memories, and people think that they are memories from past lives. There's an enormous amount of for-profit literature on that subject. And I think we're going to see that more and more with things like ghost stories, Bigfoot, aliens, and some people even talk about how places like, I shouldn't say places, channels like the History Channel and the Discovery Channel are just taking the bait, and they're just giving people what they want to hear, and they're even baiting the hooks themselves. They got pulled into that world because they want to talk all about aliens and all about Bigfoot. And somebody said one quotation, I forget the exact phrasing of it, but they were like, the History Channel and the Discovery Channel, they're just conspiracy networks now. It's always about how people are hiding behind the scenes, manipulating things, or sometimes not only people. Remember, what's the answer to everything? Aliens. Sometimes it's also the aliens. And even though I approach things like UFO sightings with a certain degree of skepticism, we were talking about this in the past once, and someone just said there's such a higher chance of UFOs existing rather than ghosts. And two friends that I had got into an argument about it. They're like, no, ghosts are more likely to be real. And the other one's like, no, UFOs are more likely to be real. And I have to agree with the person who's talking about UFOs, because when you look at the universe, you look at the cosmos, and you just look at outer space and everything around, then the possibility that intelligent life exists, I think, is so much greater, because that also doesn't require any firsthand experience of encountering somebody living beyond the grave. I mean, it doesn't violate any laws of physics or laws of nature to just say that, okay, well, Earth isn't the only planet that has aliens, and maybe some aliens are more advanced than us, and then they can make their way into Earth's atmosphere. Now, I find that a lot of the UFO stories are very difficult to document, because so many of them are based on testimony, and people are, again, once again, substituting the analysis with storytelling. They're removing the analytical components, and they want to persuade you with a story And some of them are extremely vivid, where they are just talking about how they saw this circular craft, and it had 27 windows on it, and it had this little mechanical thing atop that looked like a radio tower. Very, very vivid details. So it really makes me wonder, though, number one, did the person actually see this? I mean, is this person telling the truth and they got confused in some way? Or did they simply just fabricate the story because they think that they're a good liar, so to speak? But I don't really know. I am skeptical of a lot of this stuff, but with the skeptic card, you should always say, I will accept it if I have the proof. Absolutely, I wouldn't say that UFOs are an impossible thing, and I just gave out a pretty solid reason why I think that we will possibly encounter intelligent life from another planet at some point in the future. I mean, when exactly in our lifetime? Like, is it going to be on the evening news like the movie Independence Day, where we try to communicate with them and then they just blow up the White House? I don't know if that's exactly going to happen in our lifetime, but I definitely wouldn't rule out the possibility. And the same is true of ghosts or even something such as Bigfoot, although, I mean, the stories about Bigfoot are almost even more unbelievable than the stories about ghosts, because with Bigfoot they say that, alright, there are these tall primates that live in seclusion. They are just as successful and just as accomplished as Homo sapiens like us, but they use all of their intelligence and abilities to live in deception. That's why you don't find any remains, like, because I wondered about that when I first started getting into the Bigfoot world back in 2012. I was just wondering, like, why don't they find skeletons of these creatures? Why don't they find fecal matter from these creatures? I mean, yes, that's right. Bigfoot poop, Sasquatch dump. Like, why don't they just have those things around and then they could analyze the chromosome structure and such? And why not? I mean, they leave the tracks behind, but they don't leave behind any of these other um, pieces of evidence. And the simple response was what I just said, that people say that, oh yeah, the Sasquatch is a very intelligent and very adaptable being. They're just as advanced as human beings. It's just that they use all of their abilities to be stealthy, deceptive, and to hide, whereas people like us choose to hide. Sorry, not to hide. We choose to live out in the open. So Sasquatch wants to hide in the forest. We want to cut forests down and build shopping malls. Maybe we don't have too many shopping malls anymore thanks to that damn Amazon.com. But if you would like to weigh in the comments section about any of these particular subjects, feel free to do so. But I would also like to talk about something else, because this is True Crime Talk Radio. I was in a library recently, and I just picked up a book called Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. It is a novel, and I didn't even check it out. I just read a couple pages in the library, and I encountered this one on page 14 that said something about the Son of Sam. It says, "The summer of Son of Sam has just begun. Though the papers only have recently begun to call him by that name, and even in Ohio headlines blare the latest shooting. In a few months the police will catch David Berkowitz, and the country will focus again on other things, like the death of Elvis, the new Atari, Fonzie soaring over a shark. At this moment, though, when dark-haired New Yorkers are buying blonde wigs, the world seems to Maryland to be a terrifying and random place. Things like that don't happen here. Not in Middlewood." And that was just a section from this novel. But I thought that it just really stood out to me because there's so many pieces of info in this section to respond to. First, David Berkowitz as the Son of Sam shooter. David Berkowitz definitely confessed to two of the crimes, and much like the Zodiac Killer mystery or the Jack the Ripper mystery, people are instantly saying, hey, multiple killers, or that there is some type of cult that is operating behind the shadows. But the conventional mainstream narrative is that David Berkowitz was the Son of Sam, and I love how they call it the Summer of Son of Sam. I think it was just called the Summer of Sam, and that he was referring to himself as the Son of Sam shooter. But some people also believe that Berkowitz was a fall guy, or that he was actually possessed and demented. I shouldn't say possessed, more just like demented. It really is somewhat of a mystery, but that also reveals something very telling about the human brain, that people simply do not want to accept the mainstream fact. They always have to look for more. And sometimes it turns out to be beneficial and sometimes it doesn't. But I think that is just natural curiosity, partnered with the fact that some people do not want to accept the boring mainstream narrative because it's unsatisfying. They just can't accept that bad things happened and that some people did very cruel and malicious things because they are cruel and malicious people. But many a time, you'll find that in the true crime world, people do investigate, and it turns out there is an alternative theory that actually is more likely to be correct. And recently on the channel, I was talking about the serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells, who was known as the cross-country killer or the brutal Texan, even though he was actually born in Oakland, California. And the reason why was because Tommy Lynn Sells briefly became an alternative suspect in the Darlie Routier case, the woman who murdered her children and said that a home invader rather, stabbed her. But the reason why they suspect Tommy Lynn Sells is because a different woman in another part of the country told the exact same story, that a man broke into her house and that he had attacked her and pulled a knife out of the kitchen knife block and stabbed her and murdered her son, and she went to jail for it for quite a while, actually. But then it turned out, though, that it wasn't actually her. It was the serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells, and that he confessed to it somewhat indirectly, first they identified his location and his whereabouts, and it turned out that yes, indeed, he had committed that crime. The alternative theory was actually correct, and people can get sent to jail for crimes that they didn't commit. There can sometimes be an alternative truth that turns out to be true, and absolutely, I don't believe Tommy Lynn Sells had anything to do with the Darlie Routier case. It seemed indeed that he was incarcerated behind bars. I believe he was either 2 or 2.5 years sentence from 95 to 97, and the Darlie Routier crimes happened in 1996, so he would have been incarcerated. But that's just how I learned about it. He was an alternative suspect in the Darlie Routier case, but they investigated, and the alternative theory turned out to be correct with the other woman. So, with true crime investigations, you must see this all the time. It's on shows like 48 Hours, it's on 2020, it's on shows like Dateline, where you cannot see how, it just seems like someone could be so obviously guilty, but then the forensic science is going to point in a different direction, and they are going to be exonerated. But there's also some lighter things that I wanted to talk about in this passage from the book Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. The death of Elvis. I was talking to someone recently who was 18 years old, and I said something about Elvis Presley, and that person was like, "Who?" I was like, "Elvis? Elvis Presley? I know that you're only like 18, but you've never heard of Elvis?" We have to fear for this younger generation. I blame that damn TikTok. It is just ruining everything. You've never heard of the King? But the thing that I was talking about is that I picked up a book on pharmacology, and I said that, they say that Elvis knew this stuff inside and out, and it turned out that it wasn't actually pharmacology. I was aware of this. What Elvis had was it was a pharmacology chart, not a book. And they said that Elvis Presley could talk about not only pills, but just he could talk about drugs and their effects on the brain as well as any doctor. He would, because he did it so frequently. He had the financial resources to do so, and a lot of people in the music business got pulled into that world. So, yes, he had like this pharmacology chart on his wall, so the legend says, and I heard all about that in the docu Elvis in Hollywood. Elvis did the movie Blue Hawaii, by the way, and Angela Lansbury's also in that one. And okay, Blue Hawaii may not be the greatest film ever made, but in terms of like scene design and visual imagery, absolutely, in that respect, it is one of the best films. It's just like better than any of these like calming videos that they put out nowadays. Just watch the movie Blue Hawaii and such. Very, very visually pleasant film. And the last one here on this list of things that Celestine was talking about, Fonzie soaring over a shark. Like, there's the expression in the English language, jump the shark, and I had no idea what that meant until I was about 23 years old. I'm 33 right now, but like I couldn't get it from the context clues. Like people were asking or just using the phrase jump the shark in sentences, and I just couldn't figure it out. So one day I decided to Google it, and it turns out that it comes from an episode of Happy Days where the Fonz jumps over a shark on water skis, and it means that a television show has run out of original quality material, so they just start doing weird stuff. Maybe you've heard of a show called The Simpsons. And yeah, they've definitely done some of that. But the interesting thing about The Simpsons is a lot of people think that The Simpsons jumped the shark around maybe season 11 or season 12. And that means that there's just been this 20-year period of just like downgraded television. And people call like the first maybe 10 years classic Simpsons, and everything after that is just zombie Simpsons that has just been made purely for profit. And it really is odd though. It's like twice as long. The show's been going twice as long in that zombie-like state, whereas the classic episodes only were there for half as long. And other shows are definitely a victim of things like that. Family Guy would be one. I mean, Family Guy just really overdid it with all the blood and the vomit and just things like poop. And even to a certain extent, South Park, though. Although I find that South Park only has certain episodes in a season which are intolerable. It's still got its comedic value all the same. So to talk about some more serious things from the true crime world, somebody left me a comment recently about the disappearance of Donna Lass from 1970, and they were proposing a suspect named Rodney Alcala. Rodney Alcala was a serial killer known as the Dating Game Killer, and that person wanted to know what I would think about him as a suspect in the disappearance of Donna Lass. Donna Lass disappeared on September 6, 1970, from the Sahara Tahoe Hotel and Casino in State Line, Nevada, and whatever happened to her is a mystery. Some people think that she was abducted by an opportunistic predator. Other people think that she was abducted and murdered by the Zodiac Killer. But the reason why this person brought this up was also just looking at alternative serial killers in the disappearance of Donna Lass, including Ted Bundy. And I did an episode about Ted Bundy and Donna Lass because there are multiple people online who think that Ted Bundy, perhaps one of the most famous serial killers in American history, abducted and murdered Donna Lass. And I've always said that I will respond to someone else's content. If someone has written a book or written an article or done a podcast or a documentary, I will respond to it. But what I would not want to do is to be the origin of these weird alternative theories. Just someone asking me about, would you do an episode on Rodney Alcala as a suspect in the disappearance of Donna Lass? I would have to say no for now, unless there is some greater reason to do so, unless there is some greater reason to think that the alternative theory could be true. And a prime example of that is just what I said about Tommy Lynn Sells, as they were learning about his activities. Oh, he was in the same place as that one crime was committed, and he admitted to committing crimes during that time period, and it turned out that everything matched up, and they were able to find out that someone was in jail for a crime that the serial killer Tommy Lynn Sells had committed. Okay, I mean, those are sufficient reasons to think that. I would not want to be the origin of anything about just choosing the random serial killer of the day and thinking, hey, did this person abduct Donna Lass? Who are we going to say next? Was she also abducted by the Black Dahlia Avenger? I mean, or maybe it was Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. We could just let it go on and on and on, and I would never run out of material to talk about. But it's not just talking about weird and wild stories. I will talk about other people's series, and the reason why is because I want to challenge them. No, I don't think that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers actually orchestrated the Zodiac Killer murders, and I will tell you why. And maybe the same about the Black Dahlia Avenger Zodiac Killer connection. I don't think that is true, and I will tell you why. I don't think that it's based on facts, but I mean, when it comes to the Black Dahlia Avenger connection, that is mostly the result of Steve Hodell's creation. It's the brainchild of Steve Hodell that his father, George Hill Hodell, was not only the Black Dahlia Avenger, which is a reasonable theory. That is perhaps the least outrageous thing that Steve Hodell has said in terms of true crime hypothesizing, and George Hill Hodell as a suspect in the murder of Lucilla Lelou in 1967, the original Chop Shop lady, is something that I definitely get curious about. I mean, if someone were indeed the Black Dahlia Avenger, and then he is in the Philippines when Lucilla Lelou is murdered, and she's murdered in a rather similar way, except she was decapitated and her head was never found, if I recall correctly. But yeah, absolutely, I get curious about it. But there are other suspects in the murder of Lucilla Lou. She had lots of enemies. But what happened was she was murdered, and then she became known as the original Chop Chop Lady. I don't like the name, but that's what they call her. And then other people started committing some similar crimes, and similar murders have happened in the Philippines of dismembering people, and they're known as the Chop Chop Ladies. Again, I don't really like the name, but that's what they have labeled them as. So, but the reason why I talk about all of these theories is I want to find out what's actually happening, not just making up a silly story and seeing how people are going to respond to it. And also, I mean, I would definitely want sufficient reasons before I were to propose my own original suspect, or someone is just going to ask me, like, hey, what do you think about Jeffrey Dahmer being the Zodiac Killer and such? And it's like, I wouldn't do an episode on that because, no, just no. The whole point is that in the true crime world, we should focus on the word true rather than replacing it with storytelling crime world. I mean, some people will definitely have a good time with that, and I have to be honest with you. There is an entertaining component in true crime. I mean, these things aren't purely done in an academic way. When you watch documentaries or when you're listening to podcasts and they got the music playing in the background and they got some really flashy introduction. I mean, maybe flashy isn't the best way to describe a podcast introduction. Maybe if it's one of those vodcasts that's available here on YouTube. But I do have to admit there is something entertaining about the true crime world. And I would never want to put out content that is going to sacrifice the truth solely for the sake of entertainment. And yeah, there are going to be a lot of channels out there that are going to do that, and they're definitely going to be more famous than mine. The stuff like on BuzzFeed's True Crime page. That's why they really sold out, and they really just start making fun of the situations. But let's not forget why we're all listening to true crime content, and we all want to talk about true crime material. Some people want to increase their awareness of humanity, have a greater understanding of humanity. It makes them feel secure and safe. And other people, like me, simply just have this natural curiosity to learn everything on all sides of the issues. And that desire for the truth, I think, is very valuable and very important. And I learned a lot about this from James Randi, who ran the James Randi Educational Foundation. He was a magician called the Amazing Randi, and then he devoted a lot of his career to exposing people who claim to be psychics and showing how a magician or a trickster could replicate these types of behaviors. And the famous claim that he has always said is that people are unable to demonstrate these abilities under controlled conditions. Going back to the James Laniger story in the book Soul Survivor, absolutely, when you place somebody under controlled conditions, they are unable to even recall certain information. And there was a similar story, though, like Soul Survivor, of a boy who claimed that he was born on a Scottish island called Barrow, and he talked about his Barrow mom and his Barrow family, and then they brought him to the island, and he was unable to recall and identify specific places. Like, he had all these memories of what he claimed to be a previous life, or what seemed like a previous life. I mean, he's just a kid. What is he really saying? But when he was actually placed under control conditions and had to identify specific locations, he was unable to do so. So I think that is really quite the same with the stuff that James Randi was doing. And I've wanted to do a larger piece on this because I have a couple episodes on this channel about scamming online. Not so much like the psychic fraud that James Randi tried to expose, but he was definitely very influential on me for a time because he created the James Randi Educational Foundation, and I wanted to create something that I was going to call not the JREF like him. I was going to call it the ISEF, the Internet Security Educational Foundation, which would have essentially just been a YouTube channel where I would have talked about exposing types of online scams because I used to do a lot of that stuff in my academic work, which I almost never talk about online. I guess it's something that I've kind of closed the door on, but perhaps I could do like a larger special on that. I have a couple episodes on this channel about Nigerian 419 scamming, as well as the grandparent scam, which is one that I've referenced from time to time about how they're just forms of online scams, so to speak. But what do you think about any of the material that we've talked about in this episode? Whether it's the Zodiac Killer, the disappearance of Donna Lass, or how true crime writers are making up their stories by substituting certain things when they need other things, replacing analysis with storytelling mechanisms. What do you think about any of this stuff? Would you like to weigh in the comments section down below, or if there's a particular serial killer that you didn't hear about in this episode that you would like to hear something about for the Anything Goes segment on Fridays? I would love to read your responses, and I would love to hear from you, and just send anything you want in the comments section or to BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com. My personal email address is in the description box here, as well as my Facebook, and you can also get me on BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, where you can hear that bonus podcast that I'm always talking about, and then AstroPsych 400, Killer on a White Horse on Amazon.com, and the Teespring page. All right, well, thank you so much to everybody who has listened to this episode, and I appreciate all of you. And that's all for me now. I'll see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.